I grew up in Germany with Black Forest cake. And while it's a classic, I always had a few niggles with it. For example, that the sponge is quite dry and not really chocolatey, is it? So today I'm showing you my version. It has 14 grams of protein per slice. It's made with real melted chocolate and hot coffee for moisture. And it uses a few tricks, like stabilizing the cream with protein powder instead of icing sugar, which, in my opinion, makes the taste better than the original. But you judge yourself. So let's make the batter, shall we?
The recipe link will be in the notes. Start by melting the chocolate chips in the microwave, giving them a quick stir and setting them aside. And then mix your dry ingredients except the espresso powder in a large mixing bowl, including the protein powder, baking soda, flour, baking powder, bit of salt, cocoa, sugar, and just give it a quick stir with a whisk. Then come your wet ingredients, the eggs, sourdough discard, and fat-free Greek yogurt. Then you can add a little bit of vanilla if you like, and the melted chocolate. Stir that all together until you have a really lovely and creamy mix, which you can then add to your dry ingredients. Most of the work is already done. Just give it a quick stir until you have a slightly shaggy dough. Don't be too thorough now, because the secret for the really moist chocolate cake comes now in form of hot coffee, and you want to keep this really hot. Don't make this ahead of time and then pour it into your wet ingredients in your batter mix. This will look really weird, and if you stir it, you'll have a really liquid batter that is working as intended. That's exactly what you want. Now look at the glossy shine here. Now prepare your baking tin. And I like to do this in a double kind of fashion because my dough sticks. So I take parchment paper, measure it to the baking tin, then I fold it in half horizontally, again vertically in half, and then I fold a little triangle out of that, half again, and that triangle once more in half. Then I put the tip to the middle of the cake tin like this and fold it over at the edge to mark it, and then just a straight snip with scissors, and there you have a perfectly fit parchment paper. And for this cake I will also grease my cake pans with a bit of coconut oil, and then sieve in a little bit of cocoa powder and tilt it around over the second pan until it's all coated. And as you can see, there are always little bits that are not coated right there, and that's where your batter would stick. That's why I put in the parchment paper here. Now I weigh my cake pans so I have an even distribution of the batter between them, and then I bake them for about 35 to 40 minutes at 350 Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius until a toothpick comes out relatively clean. Now after 15 minutes of cooling, I flip them over on a cooling rack and remove the parchment so there is no moisture gathering below, and then I leave them to cool completely. At this point, I want to cut off the dome tops a little, so I use a little trick that my grandfather told me. I scored on top with a knife, just a little groove, and then I put sewing twine into that groove and just pull. And there you have a super clean cut that is even across your cake. Look at how even that is. And this is how moist the cake is, really nice. And now comes the proper German Black Forest cake topping, which is cherry juice for extreme cherry flavor, a bit of Kirsch, which is just a cherry brandy, sugar, and you boil that down to just a quarter cup so you have a really concentrated flavor. And we start with the decoration by melting a few chocolate chips and measuring baking parchment so it fits around the cake. Fold it into 3 horizontally, then unfold it and make a little piece of art with your melted chocolate over the middle. Spread it around, ideally with an offset spatula, but a knife will work fine, until you have a relatively thin layer. It doesn't have to be perfectly even, it can be a bit artsy. That is grand. Now you roll it up and it will stick to each other. That is perfect. That's what we want. And freeze it for about 30 minutes while you prepare the remaining ingredients and top your cake. Put the bottom layer of your cake onto a cake platter. If you like, spritz it with a bit of uncooked down Kirsch for an adult version, and then brush it with the concentrated cherry syrup. This is what gives it the flavor. Now comes the cream topping. Cream, bit of protein powder, and cherries for decoration. Whip the cream into really soft peaks and then add your protein powder, if you like a bit more vanilla, and then whip it until it's relatively firm. Don't over whip, otherwise it'll turn into butter, just as usual cream. I put 1/3 now on the bottom part of the cake and spread it around with an offset spatula. Then put your jarred cherries on top. They will hold up the top part of the cake. Spread a little more cream over them so you have an even layer to hold your top. And now you can just plop it up there and wiggle a bit around so you know you have a sturdy top. More cream goes on top, and spread it around just a little bit for a crumb topping. This will catch all the crumbs, the loose ones on your cake, and make the final cream topping look really nice and even. Now the remaining cream goes on. Spread it around with an offset spatula again. And it doesn't have to be perfect because the cake will be covered in decoration. Now you can do whatever you want, but what I do now is I grab the chocolate from the freezer, unroll it so I have really rough shards, break them into slightly smaller pieces if I want, top fresh cherries on my cake because I think it looks really nice, and then I glue essentially the round sides of those chocolate shards to the cake. The cream will hold them in place just fine. I sprinkle the remaining chocolate on top because no wasting, right? Well, you could eat it of course if you want. And then you have a masterpiece of a Black Forest cake. And personally, I mean, look at that. Deeply chocolatey, moist cake, protein cream, protein batter, and I think the perfect Black Forest flavor.